30 years ago, they locked my voice behind ironclad contracts and veiled threats. I became a ghost in my own life, watching from the shadows as their empire grew on buried lies. But today, the same corporation that crushed me is writing a check for $50 million. This isn't blood money. It's proof that justice may arrive late, but it never truly disappears. They thought they'd silenced me forever. They were wrong. My name is Evelyn Hart, and in 1994, I was 22 years old with a freshly minted communications degree from Northwestern and dreams bigger than the cornfields stretching across my hometown in Iowa. When Heliotech Dynamics offered me a position at their gleaming headquarters in Chicago, I thought I'd grabbed the brass ring. The company was the darling of the energy sector. Their solar panel innovations splashed across magazine covers. Their CEO, Richard Keene, hailed as a visionary who would save the planet while making shareholders rich. I remember my first day vividly. The marble lobby that smelled of fresh lilies, the panoramic views from the 32nd floor, the way everyone moved with such purpose through those halls. My cubicle might have been small, but to me, it was a launching pad. I wore my best Ann Taylor suit, the one that had cost me 2 weeks of waitressing tips. And I believed, God, how I believed, that hard work and talent would carry me straight to the top. The communications department hummed with controlled chaos. Press releases, investor reports, media strategies. We were the voice of a company supposedly changing the world. My supervisor, Margaret Downs, was a sharp woman in her 50s who'd worked her way up from secretary to department head. She took me under her wing, teaching me how to craft the perfect soundbite, how to spin numbers without technically lying, how to make investors salivate over quarterly projections. But even in those early months, there were signs. Whispered conversations that stopped when I entered the break room. Documents marked confidential, need to know, that disappeared from desks. The environmental compliance team working late nights, their faces drawn with something that looked like fear. I told myself it was normal corporate pressure, the weight of managing a billion-dollar company. The Midwest office culture was peculiar, polite on the surface but ruthless underneath, like winter ice covering dark water. People smiled at the company picnics, brought casseroles to potlucks, and remembered everyone's birthdays. Yet I watched colleagues disappear overnight, their desks cleared out before morning, their names never mentioned again. Restructuring, Margaret would say, but her eyes would drift away when she said it. By my second year, I'd been promoted twice. I was writing speeches for executives, sitting in on strategy meetings, learning the intricate dance of corporate communications. The money was better than anything my parents had ever dreamed of. I bought my first car, a Honda Accord, and rented an apartment in Lincoln Park. Success tasted like morning lattes and evening cocktails at rooftop bars where we'd toast to Heliotech's rising stock price. The first real crack in my faith came during a late-night document review. I was preparing materials for an investor presentation when I found discrepancies in our environmental impact reports, numbers that didn't add up. Test results from our manufacturing facilities that showed chemical levels far above EPA standards, followed by amended reports showing everything miraculously within limits. My hands shook as I photocopied those pages, not fully understanding why I felt compelled to keep evidence of what I was seeing. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the company videos we produced, featuring children playing near our facilities, families talking about how Heliotech had brought jobs and hope to their communities, the all-American success story we sold to the world. But those numbers haunted me: benzene levels, groundwater contamination rates, safety violations systematically erased from official records. I was young enough to still believe in the system, naive enough to think that bringing this to light would make me a hero rather than a target. In the small Iowa town where I grew up, my father had been a whistleblower at the local chemical plant. He'd lost his job, but the plant cleaned up its act. The community newspaper called him a hero. I thought I was walking in his footsteps. How wrong I was. In the corporate towers of Chicago, heroes weren't celebrated, they were eliminated. The morning I decided to speak up, Chicago was drowning in November rain. I'd spent 3 sleepless nights compiling evidence, falsified emissions reports, buried soil contamination studies, and most damning, a series of emails discussing payoffs to local officials in Indiana, where our newest facility was being built. My hands trembled as I knocked on Margaret's door, the folder burning like a live coal against my chest. She listened, her face growing paler with each document I showed her. When I finished, she sat silent for so long I could hear the rain hammering against the windows. "Evelyn," she finally said, "you need to forget you ever saw this." The fear in her eyes was more terrifying than anger would have been. But I couldn't forget. I scheduled a meeting with Richard Keene himself, believing that surely the CEO would want to know about corruption in his company. His office occupied the entire top floor, a temple of glass and steel with views stretching to Lake Michigan. He received me with a warm smile, his silver hair perfectly styled, his handshake firm and paternal. I laid out everything, the environmental violations, the cover-ups, the bribes. He listened attentively, occasionally nodding, his fingers steepled under his chin. "You've done excellent work, Evelyn," he said when I finished. "Very thorough, very detailed." He stood, walked to his window, hands clasped behind his back. "Tell me, what do you think happens to a company when allegations like these surface, even unproven ones? The truth needs to. Thousands of jobs disappear, retirement funds evaporate, families across the Midwest lose their livelihoods." He turned to face me, and his eyes were cold as winter steel. All for what? Numbers on a page? Regulations that change every few years anyway? Within an hour, I was in a conference room with 3 lawyers and the head of human resources. The NDA they placed before me was 40 pages long. They offered me 2 choices: sign it and receive a generous severance package with glowing references, or refuse and face immediate termination plus lawsuits for corporate espionage and theft of proprietary information. They had security footage of me photocopying documents after hours. They had IT logs showing I'd accessed restricted files. "We could destroy you," the lead attorney said matter-of-factly, sliding a pen across the mahogany table. "Your career, your reputation, your father's pension from Heliotech's subsidiary. Oh yes, we acquired that chemical plant 2 years ago. Didn't you know?" The room smelled of leather and coffee, and what I now recognize as the scent of power. That mixture of expensive cologne and absolute certainty. They gave me 1 hour to decide. I spent it in the bathroom, crying silently in a stall, watching my idealism dissolve like tissue paper in water. When I returned, Richard Keene was there personally. "Smart women make smart choices. Evelyn, you have such potential. Don't waste it on a battle you can't win." He smiled then, genuinely warm, as if we were discussing a minor disagreement over marketing strategy. The pen felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. As I signed my name, again and again on every page, initialing clauses that bound me to silence about everything I'd seen, everything I knew, I felt something inside me break. Not dramatically, like shattering glass, but quietly, like a flower stem bending too far. The severance was substantial, enough to live on for a year. The NDA was absolute. I couldn't discuss Heliotech's practices with anyone, not law enforcement, not journalists, not even therapists or clergy. The penalty for violation started at $5 million and included criminal prosecution for industrial sabotage. They'd crafted a perfect cage of legal language. My last day, Margaret hugged me in the elevator. "You'll survive this," she whispered. "We all do." I realized then that she had her own NDA, her own cage. Maybe everyone above a certain level did. Security escorted me out through the loading dock, not the main lobby. My cardboard box of personal items got soaked in the rain. As I stood on the street, watching the tower disappear into low-hanging clouds, I understood that I'd just been erased. Not fired, not laid off, erased. In corporate America, silence isn't just golden, it's mandatory. The check cleared 3 days later. Blood money, I thought. But I deposited it anyway. I had rent to pay and principles. I learned, are a luxury the silenced can't afford. The 30 years that followed passed like a slow-motion film where I was both observer and prisoner. I left Chicago, couldn't bear those towers scratching the sky, moved to Milwaukee where nobody knew my name. The communications degree that once opened doors now felt like a mockery. Every job interview ended the same way, enthusiastic until they called Heliotech for a reference. Ms. Hart isn't eligible for rehire, was all HR would say. But in corporate speak, that was a death sentence. I took work where I could find it. Bookkeeping for a dental office, night shifts at a copy center, freelance proofreading that paid pennies per word. I married Tom in 1999, a kind man who installed HVAC systems and never asked why I sometimes woke up gasping, dreaming of conference rooms and legal documents. We divorced 5 years later when my inability to explain my past became a wall between us. "You're hiding something," he said. And he was right. I was hiding everything. Meanwhile, Richard Keene's face graced Fortune magazine covers. Heliotech went public at a $3 billion valuation. They opened facilities in 12 states, received awards for innovation, sponsored Little League teams, and cancer research. Every success story felt like salt in an open wound. I'd see their commercials during the Super Bowl, happy families powered by clean energy, and I'd have to leave the room. The 2008 financial crisis almost broke me. My savings evaporated, and at 42, I was stocking shelves at Target, my knees aching. Watching college kids half my age become shift supervisors. One night, I stood in the cleaning supplies aisle holding a bottle of bleach, reading the warning labels, thinking how easy it would be to stop carrying this weight. But anger, I discovered, is a powerful life force. Every day I survived was a small rebellion against those who'd tried to erase me. When Me Too exploded in 2017, I watched women break their NDAs, speaking truth about powerful men. I consulted 3 lawyers about my own situation. Each one read my agreement and whistled low. "This is ironclad," they said. "Heliotech would bury you in litigation. You'd lose everything." Everything? I wanted to laugh. What was left to lose? I started keeping a journal, writing in code about things I couldn't say aloud. The Sun Company, I called them. The day the sun burned me. It was the only way to process the trauma without technically violating the agreement. Pages and pages of encrypted rage, filling composition notebooks I hid in a storage unit. The worst moments came at unexpected times. Watching a documentary about water contamination in Flint, reading about cancer clusters near industrial facilities, seeing kids with asthma inhalers in the low-income neighborhood where I'd moved. I knew things, specific things, about benzene levels and groundwater reports that could have helped those lawsuits, those families. But my silence had been purchased, and the price of breaking it would destroy what little life I'd managed to rebuild. I became a ghost at family gatherings. "What happened with that big company you worked for?" relatives would ask. "It didn't work out," was all I could say, smiling tightly while my sister whispered that I'd wasted my potential. My nephew started working in renewable energy, excited about changing the world, and I had to excuse myself from Thanksgiving dinner when he mentioned interviewing at Heliotech. Dating was impossible. How do you explain a decades-long gap in your resume? How do you tell someone you can't discuss a huge chunk of your life? Men thought I was secretive, damaged, probably a former addict or ex-convict. In a way, they were right about the ex-convict part. I was serving a life sentence in a prison made of paragraphs and clauses. By 2020, I was 54, working as an office manager for a plumbing company, living in a 1-bedroom apartment with a cat named Witness. My only joke about the situation: Richard Keene had retired with a golden parachute worth $200 million. The new CEO was his hand-picked successor. Heliotech stock soared during the pandemic as everyone focused on clean energy futures. Some nights, I'd drive past their new Midwest headquarters, built on the land where those contaminated facilities once stood. They'd cleaned it all up, of course, once the evidence was destroyed and the statute of limitations had passed. A gleaming monument to successful corporate crime, lit up like a beacon. I'd sit in my rusted Honda, now 20 years old. And imagine what would happen if I could speak. If anyone would even believe me after all this time. Silence, I learned, isn't just the absence of sound. It's a weight that grows heavier each year, compressing your spirit until you forget you ever had a voice at all. Everything changed on a Tuesday morning in January 2024. I was scrolling through news on my phone during lunch break when I saw it. Redmont State passes landmark legislation limiting NDAs in cases of public safety concerns. My sandwich fell from my hand. Redmont was a small state, but Heliotech had 3 facilities there. The law was specifically designed to void non-disclosure agreements that prevented reporting of environmental crimes, financial fraud affecting public funds, or health and safety violations. It was retroactive. My hands shook as I read the provisions. Companies could no longer use NDAs to silence whistleblowers about matters of public interest. The legislation's sponsor, State Senator Mariah Gonzalez, had lost her daughter to leukemia, likely caused by industrial contamination. She understood what corporate silence really cost. 2 weeks later, I received an email that stopped my heart. Ms. Hart, my name is Samantha Doyle. I'm an attorney specializing in corporate accountability. I believe we should talk. We met at a diner off the interstate, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that could strip paint. Samantha was maybe 35, sharp-eyed, wearing a blazer that had seen better days. She'd been investigating Heliotech for 2 years, she said, building a case for a class action suit on behalf of communities affected by their facilities. I've deposed 17 former employees, she told me, sliding a folder across the table. Your name keeps coming up. People remember you tried to do something. They remember you disappeared. I couldn't speak. After 3 decades of enforced silence, my throat had forgotten how to form these particular words. Samantha waited patiently while I struggled, tears streaming down my face. The Redmont law changes everything, she said softly. Your NDA can't stop you from testifying about environmental crimes. Not anymore. But I need to know. Do you have proof? The storage unit, my coded journals, and something else, something I'd never told anyone. I kept copies, I whispered, the words feeling like broken glass in my mouth. Before they destroyed everything, I made copies. They're in a safety deposit box in Iowa. 30 years. And I've kept them? Samantha's eyes widened. Environmental reports? The bribes? Everything. I was young and stupid enough to think someday it might matter. She reached across the table and gripped my hand. It matters now. But Evelyn, if we do this, they'll come at you with everything they have. They'll try to destroy you. I laughed. Actually laughed. They already did that 30 years ago. I'm just a ghost, remember? Ghosts have nothing left to lose. That night, I drove to Iowa, to the small bank where I'd opened that safety deposit box in 1994 with the last of my severance money. The elderly bank manager had to check 3 different systems to find the account. When he finally brought me the box, his hands trembled slightly. Ma'am, this is one of our oldest active boxes. Been paid up for 3 decades, never accessed. Inside, wrapped in plastic and perfectly preserved, were the documents that had cost me everything. Soil samples showing benzene at 700 times safe levels. Emails discussing regulatory management payments. Memos about burying test results. My younger self's handwriting in the margins. This is wrong. This is all wrong. I sat in that little private room in the bank and sobbed. For the idealistic 24-year-old who'd thought truth mattered. For the 30 years of silence. For all the people who might have been helped if I could have spoken sooner. But also, for the first time in decades, I cried with hope. The next months were a careful dance of preparation and paranoia. Samantha and I met in different locations each time, truck stops, library study rooms, 24-hour laundromats. She was building a case, but we needed more than my old documents. We needed current employees willing to talk, recent evidence that the patterns continued. Through encrypted messages, Samantha connected me with others, a chemist named Robert who'd been fired for refusing to falsify test results. a secretary named Joan who'd been blacklisted after questioning irregularities, a former security guard who'd seen hazardous waste being illegally dumped at night. We were an army of the silenced, slowly finding our voices. But Heliotech noticed. First came the phone calls, hang-ups at odd hours, then breathing on the line. My apartment was broken into while I was at work. Nothing stolen, but everything slightly displaced. A message that they could reach me whenever they wanted. A black sedan appeared outside my building, different drivers, but always watching. My boss at the plumbing company received an anonymous tip that I had a criminal record, though thankfully he didn't believe it. One evening, walking to my car, a man in an expensive suit approached. "Ms. Hart," he said pleasantly, "you're looking well. Stress can be so aging, don't you think? Especially financial stress. Medical stress. The kind that affects not just you, but everyone you care about. Are you threatening me? I'm observing that life is unpredictable. Your nephew, for instance, such a promising career at Heliotech. Your sister's mortgage with that bank we're majority shareholders in, so many connections in this world." He handed me a business card. "If you're having memory problems about ancient history, we have excellent resources to help." That night, I called Samantha from a burner phone. "They're escalating." "Good," she said. "It means they're scared. Can you hold on for 3 more weeks? We're almost ready to file." 3 weeks. After 30 years. What was 3 more weeks? But those were the longest 21 days of my life. I started varying my routes, checking for surveillance, documenting everything. The woman who'd once been too terrified to speak was now methodically building a case against her tormentors. Fear, I discovered, has an expiration date. After enough years, it ferments into rage. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Margaret Downs, my old supervisor, reached out through Samantha. She was dying, pancreatic cancer, 3 months to live, and she wanted to talk. We met at her hospice facility, where she handed me a USB drive with trembling hands. "I kept everything too," she wheezed. "Every email Richard sent, every document they made me alter. I knew someday someone would need proof." She gripped my hand with surprising strength. "Make them pay. Evelyn. For all of us who couldn't speak." The USB contained a goldmine, 20 years of internal communications showing systematic fraud, cover-ups, and intimidation. But the crown jewel was a recorded conversation between Richard Keene and the legal team, discussing how to neutralize whistleblowers. My name was mentioned specifically. Hart's too ethical for her own good. Richard's voice said clearly, "Make sure she understands the cost of that ethics." We had them. The lawsuit was filed on a Thursday morning in April 2024. By noon, it was trending on social media. David versus Goliath, woman breaks, 30 years silence to expose energy giants' crimes. The complaint was devastating: environmental destruction, bribery, systematic intimidation of employees. With my story as the centerpiece, Heliotech's response was swift and vicious. They filed a countersuit for breach of contract, seeking $50 million in damages. They claimed I was a disgruntled former employee making false allegations for money. Their PR machine went into overdrive, questioning my mental health, my work history, even suggesting I had a gambling problem that explained my financial desperation. The first hearing was a motion to dismiss. I walked into that courtroom, the federal building in Chicago, just blocks from where this all started, wearing my best suit, the first new one I'd bought in years. The gallery was packed with reporters, environmental activists, and dozens of people holding signs. "Thank you, Evelyn," and 30 years too long. Heliotech's legal team filled 2 entire tables, probably 20 lawyers in $1,000 suits. We had Samantha, her paralegal, and me. David and Goliath indeed. The judge, Honorable Patricia Williams, was known for her no-nonsense approach. As Heliotech's lead attorney argued that my NDA was binding and sacred, she interrupted. "Counselor, are you arguing that a contract can supersede public safety? That companies can buy silence about crimes?" "Your Honor, No crimes have been proven. That's what trials are for. Motion to dismiss denied. And regarding the countersuit, I find it curious that you're seeking damages for breach of a contract that may itself be illegal under the new Redmont statute and potentially under federal whistleblower protections. The real trial began 2 months later. Those were the hardest days. Sitting in the witness stand, every word scrutinized, Heliotech's lawyers trying to twist my testimony to make me seem confused, vindictive, unreliable. They brought up my divorce, my job history, even subpoenaed my therapist's notes. But I had something they didn't expect. I had nothing left to hide. Every question they asked, I answered with brutal honesty. Yes. The silence had damaged me. Yes. I'd struggled financially. Yes. I was angry. Wouldn't you be? I asked the jury. If you knew children were being poisoned and you couldn't say anything, wouldn't 30 years of that make you angry? The turning point came when we played Margaret's recording. Richard Keene's voice filled the courtroom, casual and cold, discussing my neutralization. I watched him in the gallery, older now, silver-haired, still wearing that same expensive watch. For just a moment, our eyes met, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. Other witnesses followed. Robert the chemist broke down describing falsified reports. Joan detailed the systematic intimidation. The security guard produced photos of illegal dumping. Each testimony built on the last, creating a picture of corporate malfeasance that spanned decades. But the most powerful moment was when Maria Gonzalez, the state senator who championed the law that freed me, took the stand as a character witness. She spoke about her daughter, about the cost of corporate silence, about the courage it takes to speak truth after decades of enforced quiet. Ms. Hart isn't just a whistleblower, she said. She's a survivor of corporate abuse of power, and today, she's a hero. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Each hour felt like a year. The verdict came on a rainy Tuesday, oddly fitting given that rain had bookended every major moment in this story. The foreman stood, his voice clear. We find for the plaintiff on all counts. Heliotech Dynamics engaged in systematic fraud, environmental crimes, and unlawful intimidation. The damages award was $50 million, punitive damages designed to send a message. But more importantly, the judge voided my NDA entirely and referred the case to federal prosecutors for criminal investigation. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed for the doors, phones already at their ears. Environmental activists cheered. Samantha hugged me so hard I couldn't breathe. And I stood there, stunned, unable to process that it was over, that I'd won. Richard Keene tried to leave quietly through a side door, but reporters swarmed him. I watched him push through the crowd, his lawyers forming a protective shield, his empire crumbling with every question shouted at his back. The man who'd once made me feel so small now looked diminished, elderly, defeated. The settlement conference happened a week later. Heliotech wanted to avoid appeals, further publicity, and the criminal investigation was gaining momentum. They offered the full $50 million to make it all go away quietly, no admission of guilt. Another NDA to prevent me from discussing the settlement. No, I said, surprising even Samantha. No more NDAs. They pay publicly, or we go to appeal. Their legal team huddled, whispered, made phone calls. Finally, the lead attorney nodded. Heliotech will pay the full judgment, publicly. With a statement acknowledging the verdict, the check signing was arranged for maximum publicity. Heliotech wanted it done quietly, but the judge insisted on open court. As I sat at that table, pen in hand, cameras clicking like rainfall, I thought about the 24-year-old girl who'd signed her first agreement in terror. This time, my hand was steady. Ms. Nart, the Heliotech representative said stiffly, sliding the check across the table. Your compensation. $50 million. Not for my silence this time, but for breaking it. I looked at the check, then at the cameras, then directly at Richard Keene, who'd been forced to attend. This isn't compensation, I said clearly. It's evidence that speaking truth, no matter how delayed, has power. Evidence that corporate giants can be held accountable. Evidence that 30 years of silence can end with justice. The crowd outside the courthouse was massive. Environmental groups, labor unions, other whistleblowers who'd been inspired to come forward. They cheered as I walked down those steps, flashbulbs creating a constellation of light in the gray afternoon. A young woman, maybe the age I'd been when this started, pushed forward. Ms. Hart, I work for a chemical company. They're making us sign NDAs about safety violations. What should I do? I gripped her hands, looked her straight in the eye. Document everything, save everything. And remember, they can buy your silence temporarily, but they can't buy the truth permanently. The truth waits. And when the moment comes, speak it. The rain had stopped by the time I reached the bottom of the courthouse steps. After 30 years of gray skies, the clouds were finally breaking. The crowd still cheered, reporters still shouted questions, but I heard none of it. In that moment, there was only the weight lifting from my shoulders, a weight I'd carried so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand straight. Samantha stood beside me, fielding questions, protecting me from the surge of people wanting statements, photos, pieces of my story. But I didn't need protection anymore. The woman who'd hidden for 3 decades was done hiding. Ms. Hart, a reporter pushed forward. What will you do now? I thought about all those years of silence, the minimum wage jobs, the failed marriage, the nights I'd stood in my bathroom holding pills, wondering if silence would kill me before I could break it. I thought about Margaret dying with her secrets, about Robert and Joan and all the others who'd suffered for speaking truth. I thought about the children in those contaminated communities who might now get justice. I'm going to live, I said simply. For 30 years, I existed. Now, I'm going to live. The $50 million felt surreal. Numbers in an account that could buy back some of what I'd lost. Not the years, not the youth, not the optimism, but perhaps a chance at peace. I'd already decided to fund a foundation for silenced whistleblowers, to pay for lawyers like Samantha, who'd believe them when no one else would. Richard Keene pushed through the crowd toward his waiting car, his shoulders hunched, his empire in ruins. Federal investigators had raided Heliotech's offices that morning. The board had called an emergency meeting to discuss his removal. The mighty had fallen, and I, the ghost he'd created, had been the one to push them. Evelyn, he called out, stopping at his car door. The crowd quieted, cameras swinging between us. Was it worth it? 30 years for this moment? I walked toward him, the crowd parting like water. We stood face to face, the CEO and the ghost, the silencer and the silenced. You took 30 years of my voice, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. But you never took my truth. And truth, Richard, doesn't have an expiration date. He opened his mouth, closed it, had nothing to say. The man who'd controlled narratives for decades was finally speechless. He got in his car and disappeared into traffic. Into history. Into the kind of obscurity that would eat at him worse than any prison sentence. As I walked away from the courthouse, my phone rang. My nephew, calling from his lunch break. Aunt Evelyn, I saw the news. My God, I had no idea. I'm quitting Heliotech today. I'm so proud of you. Don't quit, I told him. Stay. Be the voice on the inside that I couldn't be. The world needs people who won't sign away their conscience. The wind picked up, strong and clean, blowing away the last of the rain clouds. I stood on that Chicago street, in the shadow of the towers that had once crushed me. And I laughed. Not bitter laughter, not broken laughter, but the pure sound of someone who'd finally reclaimed their voice. 30 years they'd silenced me. 30 years of locked words, swallowed screams, buried truth. They'd paid me once for my silence, and now they'd paid again for breaking it. $50 million, not blood money this time, but justice money, vindication money, freedom money. I walked toward the lake, toward the horizon, toward whatever came next. Behind me, reporters were already filing their stories, my words spreading across the internet. my voice finally joining the chorus of truth-tellers who refuse to stay silent. They silenced me for 30 years. Now they're paying my $50 million severance, but the real payment, the one that matters, is this. I have my voice back, and I will never, never be silent again. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Leave a comment below, and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Your own stories of standing up against injustice, finding your voice, or overcoming silence would mean the world to me. Until next time, keep speaking your truth.